Millionaire enters hospital. Poor triplets call him Dad and hand him a torn photo, a story of lost love and found family. The November morning in Denver cast long shadows across the marble steps of St. Mary's Medical Center. Richard Blackwood adjusted his expensive cashmere coat against the crisp Colorado air, his breath forming small clouds as he climbed toward the hospital's main entrance. At 52, he carried himself with the practiced confidence of a man who had built an empire from nothing. Real estate developments across 3 states, investment portfolios that most people could only dream of, and a penthouse overlooking the Rocky Mountains that graced architectural magazines. Yet beneath the polished exterior, Richard felt the familiar hollow ache that no amount of success could fill. His routine quarterly health checkup was just another appointment in a calendar managed by assistants, another obligation in a life that had become a series of profitable but meaningless transactions. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and Richard stepped into the sterile brightness of the hospital lobby. The familiar smell of disinfectant mixed with coffee from the small cafe in the corner. He approached the reception desk, where a middle-aged woman with kind eyes looked up from her computer screen. "Good morning, I'm Richard Blackwood. I have a 10 a.m. appointment with Dr. Patterson." "Of course, Mr. Blackwood. Please take a seat in the cardiac wing waiting area. 3rd floor, elevator bank to your right. Dr. Patterson will see you shortly." As Richard walked toward the elevators, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished floor, he noticed the usual hospital bustle around him. Nurses hurried past with charts, families huddled together in quiet conversation, and somewhere, in the distance, a child was crying. He pressed the elevator button, checking his Rolex. 9:47 a.m. Always early, always in control. The elevator doors opened on the 3rd floor, and Richard stepped into a different world. The cardiac wing had been designed with warmer colors, soft blues and earth tones meant to calm anxious hearts. He found the waiting area and settled into one of the comfortable chairs, pulling out his phone to review the morning's emails from his company, Blackwood Enterprises. That's when he heard it. "Daddy!" The voice was high-pitched, excited, unmistakably that of a child. Richard looked up absently, expecting to see some family reunion playing out nearby. Instead, his world tilted on its axis. 3 children, identical triplets who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, were running directly toward him. They had tousled brown hair, bright blue eyes, and wore clothes that had seen better days. Faded jeans with patches at the knees, sneakers that were clearly too small, and mismatched sweaters that spoke of hand-me-downs and charity donations. Daddy, you came." The first boy reached him and wrapped his small arms around Richard's legs before he could react. "We knew you'd come back," the second child exclaimed, his face glowing with pure joy. The third boy, slightly smaller than his brothers, hung back for just a moment before approaching more cautiously. In his small hands, he held something precious, a photograph, torn and faded, its edges worn from countless handlings. Richard stared in complete shock, his phone forgotten in his lap. I think there's been a mistake. I'm not—" "Yes, you are," the first boy insisted, looking up at him with eyes that were startlingly familiar. "You're our daddy. Mama showed us your picture 1,000,000 times." The third boy stepped forward and carefully placed the torn photograph in Richard's trembling hands. "She said you'd come back when we really needed you." Richard looked down at the photograph, and his entire world crumbled. It was a picture of himself, 25 years younger, laughing at a camera with his arm around a beautiful young woman with auburn hair and the most radiant smile he'd ever seen. The woman was Elena Rodriguez, the love of his life, the one person who had made him believe in something beyond profit margins and success. The photograph had been torn down the middle, leaving just her hand visible on his shoulder, but he recognized it instantly. It had been taken at a county fair in Pueblo, Colorado, during the summer of 1999, 3 months before everything fell apart. "Where did you get this?" Richard whispered, his voice barely audible. "From Mama," the smallest boy said simply. "She's sick, really sick. That's why we're here." Richard looked up at the 3 faces surrounding him, seeing for the first time what he should have noticed immediately: the shape of their eyes, the stubborn set of their chins, the way the oldest boy unconsciously ran his hand through his hair when he was nervous, exactly like Richard did during board meetings. "What are your names?" he managed to ask. "I'm Tommy," said the boy, still clinging to his legs. "That's Jake," he pointed to his brother, "and that's Sam. We're 8 years old and we were born on March 15th. March 15th, 2016. Richard's mind raced backward. Elena had left Denver in August of 2015 after their bitter argument about his priorities, his obsession with building his business, his inability to commit to their relationship. She had thrown her engagement ring at him and walked out of his life forever. He had been too proud to follow her, too convinced that his empire building was more important than love. If she had been pregnant when she left. "Where is your mother?" Richard asked, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't felt in decades. "Room 314, Jake said. "She has cancer. The doctors say she's really sick and she might not get better." Richard felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath him. Elena was here, in this hospital, dying, and she had never told him about their sons. Their sons. A nurse approached the group, her expression kind but concerned. "Boys, you need to keep your voices down in the waiting area. And sir, I'm sorry if they're bothering you." "They're not bothering me," Richard said quickly, his voice stronger than he felt. They're my sons." The nurse's eyebrows rose in surprise, but she nodded professionally. "Would you like me to take you to Mrs. Rodriguez's room? She's been asking about you." Richard's heart stopped. She's been asking about me? For the past 3 days since she was admitted. She said she was waiting for their father to... "Come!" Tommy tugged on Richard's expensive suit jacket. "Will you come see Mama? She's been waiting for you for a really long time." Richard looked down at the 3 faces looking up at him with such hope, such trust, such desperate need. In their eyes, he saw Elena's warmth, her capacity for love, her unwavering faith in the goodness of people. He also saw his own features, unmistakable now that he knew to look for them. 25 years of building walls around his heart, 25 years of telling himself that success was enough, that he didn't need anyone. All of it crumbled in the face of 3 8-year-old boys who called him Dad. "Yes," he whispered, then cleared his throat and said it stronger. "Yes, I'll come see your mother." As they walked down the corridor toward room 314, Richard's hands shook. He was about to face the woman he had never stopped loving, the woman whose absence had driven him to build an empire as a monument to his loneliness. And he was about to learn why she had never told him about the 3 most important people in the world. The door to room 314 was slightly ajar. Through the gap, Richard could see a figure in the hospital bed, turned toward the window. The afternoon sun, streaming through the glass, illuminated auburn hair that was now thin and brittle, but still beautiful. Tommy pushed the door open wider. "Mama! Mama! Look who we found! We found Daddy!" Elena Rodriguez slowly turned her head toward the door, and Richard felt his heart break all over again. She was still beautiful, but the cancer had ravaged her body. Her cheeks were hollow, her skin pale, but her eyes, those incredible brown eyes that had haunted his dreams for 25 years, still held the same warmth, the same strength that had made him fall in love with her all those years ago. "Hello, Richard," she said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of relief, regret, and something that might have been forgiveness. "I've been waiting for you." The silence in room 314 stretched like a taut wire between past and present. Richard stood frozen in the doorway, the torn photograph clutched in his hand, while Eleanor watched him with eyes that held 25 years of secrets. The triplets, clustered around their mother's bed, their innocent faces shifting between their parents, sensing the weight of the moment without fully understanding it. "Boys," Elena said gently, her voice weak but warm, "why don't you go get some juice from the vending machine? I gave you quarters this morning." "But Mama," Sam protested, "we just found Daddy. We don't want him to leave again." Richard's heart twisted at the casual assumption that he would abandon them, an assumption that spoke volumes about the story these children had been told about their father. "I'm not going anywhere," Richard said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a $20 bill. "Here, get whatever you want. I'll be right here when you get back." Jake took the money with wide eyes. $20 was probably more than they usually saw at one time. "Promise?" he asked. "I promise." After the boys left, Richard slowly approached Elena's bedside. Up close, he could see the full extent of her illness. The woman who had once hiked mountain trails with him, who had laughed at his terrible jokes and challenged his stubbornness, was now fragile as glass. But her eyes still held that fierce intelligence that had captivated him from their first meeting at a coffee shop near the University of Denver. "Sit down, Richard," she said, patting the chair beside her bed. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," he replied, settling into the chair. The expensive fabric of his suit felt foreign and uncomfortable in this setting. "Elena, why didn't you tell me?" She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers picking at the hospital blanket. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of years of difficult decisions. "Do you remember our last fight?" she asked. How could he forget? It had been a sweltering August evening in his downtown office. Elena had come to surprise him with dinner, only to find him buried in blueprints and contracts for what would become his most successful development project. She had stood in the doorway holding takeout containers, watching him ignore her for the 7th time that week. "You said I cared more about my buildings than I did about you," Richard said quietly. "And you said that someone with my background should understand that financial security doesn't just happen, it has to be built." Elena's voice carried no accusation, just the weariness of old wounds. "You said I was being selfish for wanting your time when you were trying to build our future," Richard winced. He remembered the words differently in his memory. Justified, even noble. Hearing them repeated back to him, he heard what Elena must have heard. Dismissal, condescension, the implication that her needs were less important than his ambitions. "Was pregnant," Elena continued, her hand moving unconsciously to her stomach. "I had just found out that morning. I came to your office to tell you, to share the most important news of our lives. But you wouldn't even look up from your papers." The weight of this revelation hit Richard like a physical blow. She had been carrying his children, their children, and he had been too obsessed with profit margins to notice. "When I threw the ring at you and walked out, I was going to come back the next day. I was going to try one more time to make you understand that love isn't a business transaction, that relationships require presence, not just promises of future financial security." "But you didn't come back," Richard said, his voice barely a whisper. "No, I didn't. Because that night I called my sister Maria in Pueblo. I was crying, telling her about our fight, about the pregnancy, about how I didn't know what to do, and she told me something I've never forgotten." Elena paused to take a sip of water from the plastic cup on her bedside table. Her hands shook slightly, and Richard had to resist the urge to help her. Maria said, "Elena, you can't make someone love you more than they love their own success. If he's not choosing you now, what makes you think a baby will change that? You'll just be raising a child with a father who sees them as another obligation to manage." Richard felt sick. "Elena, I did love you. I loved you more than anything. I know you did, in your way. But love isn't just a feeling, Richard. It's a choice you make every day. It's showing up, it's being present. It's understanding that the people you love are more important than the things you want to achieve. The truth of her words cut deep, because Richard knew she was right. Even now, 25 years later, his first instinct when faced with a crisis was to think about control, about management, about how to fix things through sheer force of will and financial resources. I moved to Pueblo, Elena continued. I got a job at an elementary school teaching 3rd grade. When the boys were born, Maria helped me raise them. I never asked you for anything, not money, not support, nothing. But why? Elena, I had a right to know about them. They had a right to know about me. Elena's eyes flashed with some of her old fire. Did you really, Richard? Because in the 3 months after I left, how many times did you try to contact me? How many times did you put aside your precious business deals to fight for us? Richard opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. The answer was 0. He had thrown himself into work even more intensely after Elena left, using his pain as fuel for his ambition. He had told himself he was better off alone, that Elena had proven she couldn't handle being with a man who had serious goals. I thought about telling you 1,000 times over the years, Elena said, her voice growing softer, especially when the boys started asking questions about their father. I kept that photograph, the only one I had of us together, and I would show it to them and tell them stories about you. Good stories, she added quickly. I never spoke badly about you to them, Richard. They know you're successful, that you're smart, that you worked hard to build something important. But you told them I left. I told them that sometimes people who love each other very much still can't make their relationship work, that sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt, even when they don't mean to. I told them that their father was a good man who lived in a different world from ours. Richard looked around the sparse hospital room, the generic furniture, the single wilted flower. In a plastic vase, the boys' drawings taped to the wall. Elena, I have money. I could have helped. I could have what? Sent checks, hired tutors, set up trust funds. Elena's voice was gentle but firm. Richard, our boys don't need your money. They need your heart. They need a father who shows up not because he has to, but because he wants to. They need someone who understands that love is spelled T-I-M-E. Before Richard could respond, the door burst open and the triplets tumbled back in, their arms full of snacks and their faces bright with excitement. Daddy! Daddy! The nurse downstairs said, "You're really rich and famous," Tommy announced, clutching a bag of chips. She said you build big buildings and everything. Is that true? Jake asked, his eyes wide. Are you really famous? Richard looked at his sons. He couldn't deny it anymore. They were undeniably his, and realized that their excitement wasn't about his wealth or status. They were excited because they had a father, and in their 8-year-old minds, having a father who was important in the world made them important too. I guess I am pretty successful, Richard said carefully. But that's not the most important thing about me. What is? Sam asked, settling on the bed next to his mother. Richard looked at Elena, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Then he looked at the 3 boys who shared his eyes, his stubborn chin, his nervous habits. For the first time in 25 years, he knew exactly what was most important. The most important thing about me is that I'm your father, he said simply. The boys beamed, but Elena's expression grew sad. Richard, we need to talk about something important, she said. Boys, remember how we talked about Mama being really sick? The joy faded from their faces, replaced by the solemn understanding that children develop too quickly when illness invades their family. The doctors say, I don't have very much time left, Elena continued, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Maybe a few weeks, Maybe a little more. We need to figure out what's going to happen to you boys. Richard felt the floor drop away beneath him again. He had just discovered he had 3 sons, and now he was facing the prospect of losing the only parent they had ever known. "Where will we go?" Sam asked in a small voice. "Well," Elena said, looking at Richard meaningfully, "that depends on your father." 3 pairs of eyes turned to Richard with a mixture of hope and fear that took his breath away. These children, who had known him for less than an hour, were looking at him as if he held their entire future in his hands. And he did. "You'll come home with me," Richard said, the words coming from somewhere deeper than thought. "You'll come home and we'll figure everything out together." "Really?" Jake asked. "You want us?" Richard thought about his empty penthouse, his solitary meals, his weekends spent working because he had nothing else to do. He thought about 25 years of success that had left him rich in everything except what mattered. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want you more than anything in the world." Tommy launched himself at Richard, wrapping his small arms around his neck. "I love you, Daddy." As Jake and Sam joined the embrace, Richard caught Eleanor's eye over their heads. She was crying, but she was also smiling. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. Richard realized that this was why she had been waiting for him, why she had asked about him for the past 3 days. She hadn't brought him here to punish him or to make him feel guilty. She had brought him here to give him the greatest gift possible. A second chance at love, at family, at the life he had been too proud and too foolish to choose 25 years ago. As he held his sons for the first time, Richard understood that he was finally about to learn what it meant to be truly wealthy. Not in buildings or investments or bank accounts, but in the irreplaceable currency of love, presence, and family. The torn photograph lay on the bedside table, but it no longer represented something lost. Instead, it was the bridge between past and future, between the man Richard had been and the father he was about to become. Outside the window, the Denver skyline stretched toward the mountains, dotted with buildings that bore the Blackwood name. But inside room 314, Richard Blackwood was about to discover that his greatest construction project wasn't made of steel and glass. It was made of love, second chances, and 3 8-year-old boys who had been waiting their whole lives for their father to come home. The end. This story explores themes of redemption, the true meaning of success, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Through Richard's journey from isolation to connection, we see that it's never too late to choose what truly matters, and that sometimes our greatest failures can become the foundation for our most important victories. Thank you for watching this story unfold with us here on M&A The Story Unfolds. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. We'd love to know where you're watching. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of the world you're joining us from. Your support means everything. See you in the next story.